The milk didn't just splash, it cascaded, white rivulets running down the old man's face, soaking into his collar, dripping onto the tiled floor like some cruel baptism. For a moment, the entire store froze. Then a burst of laughter erupted from behind the counter. "Maybe that'll wake you up, old man," one of the staff sneered, his voice sharp and cold. "You're moving too slow. This isn't a retirement home, you know." Another clerk leaned against the register, smirking. "Yeah, hurry up already. People have lives to live. You can't just take all day because your knees don't work." The old man didn't speak. He just stood there, his hands trembling, his grocery basket still hanging from his arm. Inside were only a few items: a loaf of bread, a small carton of eggs, a bag of rice. Essentials, nothing fancy, nothing indulgent. But even these simple things seemed like a struggle for him to gather. His movements had been slow, deliberate, his body stiff with age. And now, for that, he was being treated like trash. Customers nearby glanced away awkwardly. A woman tugged her child closer. A man frowned but said nothing, muttering to himself as he left. Not one person stepped forward. Not one defended him. The old man's lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to speak, to defend his dignity, but no words came. His silence wasn't weakness. It was something deeper, the kind of silence that spoke of decades of swallowing pain, of learning when it was safer to endure than to fight back. "Look at him," another staff member jeered, pulling out his phone as if to record. "Pathetic. Bet he doesn't even have the money to pay for this stuff." The laughter grew louder. The milk on his head grew colder. And yet the old man's eyes, tired, lined with years of sacrifice, remained steady. There was no rage in them, no fire, only a kind of heavy sadness, a sadness that came from knowing that cruelty wasn't new, only recycled from generation to generation. But what the staff didn't know, what no one in that store realized, was that the man they mocked wasn't just some helpless nobody. This was a man who had built his entire life on sacrifice, a man who had raised a son by himself, working double shifts, skipping meals, enduring humiliation after humiliation so that his boy could one day stand tall. And that boy, the son he'd poured every ounce of love and labor into, was about to walk through the front door of the store.
The laughter didn't stop. If anything, it grew bolder with each passing second, feeding off the silence of the old man, as though his restraint was an invitation for cruelty. One of the clerks shoved the basket off the counter, letting the bread and eggs tumble to the ground. The eggs cracked open on the polished tile, yellow yolks spreading like little suns across the floor. The customers gasped, but no one intervened. "You see that?" the clerk sneered. "You can't even hold on to your groceries. Just leave, old man, you're slowing everyone down." Still, the man said nothing. He bent slowly, painfully, to gather the bread, ignoring the broken eggs. His joints cracked as he crouched, his hands trembling as he reached. And as he moved, his mind, quiet, weary, wandered back to another time. He had not always been this slow. Once his steps had been strong, his back straight, his hands steady. He had worked construction in the blazing heat of summer and the freezing bite of winter. His palms were calloused from years of lifting bricks, carrying steel, hammering nails into wooden beams. He remembered the ache of long shifts, the sweat that stung his eyes, and the exhaustion that lingered even in sleep. But he never complained, because he had someone counting on him. His wife had died young, leaving him alone with their son, a boy barely 5 years old, with wide, searching eyes that asked questions even when his lips didn't. The man had looked at that child and sworn with every fiber of his being, that he would not fail him. So he worked, and worked, and worked. He packed lunchboxes while skipping his own meals. He walked to save bus fares so his son could buy textbooks. He wore the same old coat winter after winter while saving to buy his son shoes that fit. Every sacrifice carved deeper lines into his face, but every smile from his boy made it worth it. And now, decades later, here he was, older, slower, worn down by the years, but still proud, still carrying the dignity of a man who had never broken his promise. Until today, until this moment in the store where his dignity was smeared with milk and laughter. "Come on, Grandpa," another staff member said mockingly, clapping his hands like he was urging on a child. "Pick it up, chop chop." The old man lifted the bread and placed it back into the basket, his eyes lowering to the ground. His silence wasn't fear, it was restraint, a choice. Because he knew something these young men didn't. He knew that anger was cheap, easy, but holding on to dignity, that was strength. What no one expected, however, was how close this fragile moment was to shattering, because outside the store, footsteps approached, confident, steady, a man about to enter and change everything. The old man straightened up slowly, the basket trembling in his hands. His shirt clung to him, damp from the milk, his dignity hanging by a thread. He moved to set the basket back on the counter, but one of the clerks smacked it away with the back of his hand. "Didn't you hear me?" the clerk barked, his voice loud enough for the entire store. "We said leave. You're holding up the line." A ripple of nervous laughter spread among the staff. The customers shifted uneasily, but no one moved, no one dared to challenge the staff. The old man's eyes flicked toward the floor. He inhaled deeply, the sound shaky, like the rustle of paper in the wind. His lips pressed into a thin line. Not anger, discipline. A lifetime of discipline. "Look at him," one of the younger clerks sneered. He couldn't have been older than 20. "He's pathetic. Old, slow, useless. People like you don't belong here. You should be in some nursing home, drooling on yourself." The insult landed heavy, but the old man didn't flinch. Instead, his mind drifted back to the nights when his son was still little, sleeping soundly on a mattress too thin for comfort. He would creep in quietly after a double shift, his clothes stained with dust and sweat, and watch the boy's chest rise and fall. That boy was the reason he endured everything, the reason he swallowed his pride day after day. But here, in this store, the weight of humiliation pressed harder than ever. A woman in line whispered, "This is too much." Her husband tugged at her sleeve. "Don't get involved, it's not our business." Another man pulled out his phone, recording the scene, not to help, but to capture the spectacle. His screen glowed, the lens trained on the old man's humiliation. The staff noticed and laughed. "Yeah, get this on video. Slowest shopper of the year." The old man's hand tightened around the basket. His knuckles whitened. For a fleeting moment, it looked as if he might finally break his silence, might let out the roar of years of swallowed pain. But instead, he closed his eyes. One breath. Two. The cruelty escalated. One of the clerks leaned across the counter, close enough that the old man could smell the faint sting of cologne. "Why are you even here, huh? Men like you don't matter. Nobody cares. Nobody ever will." That was the moment the air shifted, the moment the store's laughter and mockery reached its highest pitch. And it was precisely at that moment, when dignity hung by a single fraying thread, that the bell above the front door chimed. A man walked in. Not old, not frail, not slow. His stride was purposeful, his gaze sharp, his presence magnetic enough to draw every eye in the room. His suit jacket caught the light, his polished shoes clicking against the tile with authority. He radiated the quiet confidence of someone used to being in charge, someone who belonged in boardrooms and at negotiation tables. He was the sun. And when his eyes landed on the scene before him, the spilled eggs, the milk dripping from his father's shirt, the laughter still ringing in the air, his jaw clenched so hard it looked as though it might crack. But the staff didn't know who he was. Not yet. To them, he was just another customer, and that ignorance was about to become their undoing.
The door shut behind him with a soft thud, but the weight of his presence filled the room like thunder rolling in the distance. He paused just inside the entrance, eyes narrowing at the sight before him. His father, clothes soaked, groceries scattered, head bowed, not in defeat, but in patience. And surrounding him, the staff, young, arrogant, drunk on their own cruelty. The son's fists curled at his sides. 1,000 thoughts crashed in his head. Rage, disbelief, sorrow. He had seen injustices before. He had fought his way through boardrooms where men sneered at his background, through universities where professors underestimated him, through deals where competitors tried to undercut him. But never had he imagined this. His father, the man who had built his entire world, being treated like dirt in a place that belonged to him. He walked forward, calm, controlled, each step deliberate. "Excuse me," he said, his voice even but firm. "What's going on here?" The laughter faltered just slightly. The clerk at the register looked him over, expensive watch, tailored suit, and sneered. "Nothing you need to worry about, just teaching this old man a lesson." The son's eyes flicked to the broken eggs on the floor, then to the milk dripping down his father's shirt. Slowly, he raised his gaze back to the clerk. "A lesson?" His tone was razor-sharp, each word deliberate. "What kind of lesson requires pouring food on a customer's head?" The clerk smirked, trying to recover his bravado. "He was too slow, holding up the line. We don't have time for that." The son stepped closer, his presence towering now. "So you humiliate him? That's how you run this place?" A nervous chuckle rippled through the staff, though one of them shifted uncomfortably, realizing perhaps for the first time how serious this stranger was. "Hey, look," another clerk chimed in defensively. "We were just joking around. Lighten up." The son's eyes darkened. "Does this look like a joke to you?" He pointed toward his father, still standing quietly, clutching the basket like it was the last thread of his dignity. For the first time, the laughter truly died. The customers who had been silent now leaned in, watching the confrontation unfold. Phones hovered, recording, capturing every word. The son took another step forward, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. "Tell me something. When you look at him, when you see an old man moving slow, do you think that makes him worthless?" The staff exchanged uneasy glances, but no one answered. "Because I'll tell you something you clearly don't know. That man you're mocking, he's lived through things you couldn't even survive a day of. He's worked harder than all of you combined, and the only reason any of you can stand here laughing is because men like him built the ground you're standing on." A heavy silence fell. Even the customers shifted uncomfortably, shame creeping into the edges of their faces. One clerk rolled his eyes, trying to recover his dominance. "Whatever, man. He's just some old guy slowing everyone down. You don't know him." The son's jaw clenched. The fury burned behind his eyes, but he swallowed it down. Not yet. Not yet would he reveal who he was. The staff's arrogance still had one more layer to peel back, and he would let them bury themselves in it. He turned slightly, his gaze landing back on his father. For a moment, their eyes met. The father's expression was calm, almost pleading. "Don't lose yourself to anger." The son inhaled, steadying himself. Then he faced the staff again. "You're right about one thing," he said slowly. "I do know him. Better than anyone. And I promise you this. You're going to regret every second of what you've done today." The staff bristled, trying to laugh it off, but their voices faltered. The weight of his conviction, the authority in his tone, it was unlike anything they were used to. They didn't know it yet, but they weren't talking to just another customer. They were standing at the edge of a revelation that would shatter their arrogance completely. And it was coming soon.
The sun stood there, unwavering, his voice like steel. The staff had gone quieter, but arrogance clung to them like cheap cologne. They weren't ready to back down, not yet. One of the clerks, a lanky young man with acne scars on his jaw, scoffed. "Who even are you, huh? Some rich guy with a big mouth? You think you can walk in here and tell us how to do our jobs?" The others chuckled nervously, emboldened by his words. "Yeah," another chimed in, smirking. "What are you, some kind of social justice warrior? We don't take orders from random customers." The sun didn't flinch. His calm was unnerving, like a storm building quietly on the horizon. "I don't need to tell you how to do your jobs, because you've already shown everyone here exactly what kind of people you are." His words hung heavy in the air. Some customers shifted uncomfortably, ashamed that they had stayed silent. A woman at the back whispered, "He's right," but her voice was drowned out by the staff's laughter. The lanky clerk leaned forward across the counter. "Look, man, if you don't like it, you can leave. We run this place how we want. Nobody's going to miss some slow old man or some stranger sticking his nose where it doesn't belong." The son's lips curled into the faintest smile. It wasn't amusement. It was something darker, a patience sharpened into a blade. "Is that so?" he asked, voice low, controlled. "Yeah," the clerk shot back, puffing out his chest. "That's so. You got a problem with that?" The son took one slow step closer, his eyes locked on the clerk's. "No," he said quietly, "but you're about to." The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. The staff didn't laugh this time. They just stood there, sneering, not realizing the ground beneath them was about to crumble. And then, "Excuse me," a new voice cut through the silence, strong, authoritative. The store manager hurried over, his brow furrowed, clearly having sensed that something was very wrong. He was an older man, in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of stiff posture that spoke of discipline. "What on earth is going on here?" the manager demanded, his gaze sweeping from the spilled eggs on the floor to the dripping milk on the old man's shoulders. His face darkened instantly. "Who did this?" The clerk scrambled. "It was just a joke," one stammered. "Yeah, no big deal. He was just being slow. We were trying to move the line along." The manager's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. "A joke? You think humiliating an elderly customer in front of the whole store is a joke?" The staff shrank back, their bravado faltering. But before the manager could continue, his eyes shifted, landing on the son, and in that moment recognition lit up his face. His stern expression faltered into surprise, then into something closer to panic. "Sir," the manager said quickly, voice dropping into deference, I didn't realize you were here." The clerks looked around, confused. "Wait, what?" one of them asked, frowning. "Sir," another echoed, glancing between the son and the manager, "who is this guy?" The manager swallowed hard, his eyes never leaving the son. "You idiots," he hissed, his face pale. "Do you have any idea who you've just insulted?" The clerks blinked, baffled.
"What are you talking about?" The manager straightened his posture, his voice ringing with the weight of the truth. "That man," he pointed to the son, "isn't just a customer. He's the owner of this store, your boss." The words dropped like a bomb. The clerks froze, their faces draining of color, arrogance evaporating in an instant. The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the hum of the refrigerators in the back. Customers gasped. A few pulled out their phones to record, realizing they were witnessing something that would go down as unforgettable. And the old man, still standing quietly, soaked in milk, finally lifted his gaze, watching as the staff who mocked him just minutes ago now stood trembling before the son he had raised.
The air was electric, charged with the weight of revelation. The staff stared at the son, their boss, as though the floor had opened beneath them. Their smirks had vanished, replaced by wide eyes and pale faces. The son didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was calm, even, but each word landed like a hammer. So, he paused, scanning their faces one by one. "This is how you treat the people who keep this store alive, with humiliation, with cruelty, by pouring milk on their heads and laughing at them like animals?" The lanky clerk opened his mouth to stammer something, anything, but the son raised his hand slightly, silencing him instantly. "No," he said firmly, "you don't get to speak. Not right now. Because every excuse you're about to make, every pathetic attempt to justify yourselves has already been recorded." He gestured toward the customers, their phones raised, capturing every second. "And the world will see it. Your families will see it. Your friends, your future employers, if you can find any after this." The staff shifted uncomfortably, sweat prickling their foreheads. The son's gaze hardened. "I built this store not just to make money, but to give people work. To give this community a place where everyone can shop with dignity. And you, in your arrogance, thought you had the right to decide who deserves respect and who doesn't." His voice dropped lower, colder. "You thought being slow made him less of a man." He stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking against the tile. The clerks shrank back instinctively. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" His voice trembled now, not with weakness, but with the fury of someone holding himself back from breaking. "He's my father, the man who worked himself to the bone so I could have an education, the man who skipped meals so I could eat, the man who walked miles in the rain so I could ride the bus, the man who gave up everything, so I could stand where I stand today." The words echoed through the store, each one cutting deeper than the last. The son's eyes blazed. "And you dared pour milk on his head." The clerks bowed their heads now, ashamed, trembling. The son exhaled slowly, the rage boiling inside him threatening to spill over. His voice rose, firm, final. "You're finished here, every one of you. I don't need people like this representing my name, my business, my family. Collect your things." "Stop." The word was soft, almost fragile, but it froze the room. Everyone turned. The old man had spoken. His voice, though quiet, carried authority, the kind not of power, but of wisdom earned through years of hardship. The son looked at him, startled. "Father!" The old man shook his head gently. His eyes, tired, kind, yet unshaken, met his son's blazing stare. No, not this way. After everything they did to you, the son demanded, his voice trembling with restrained fury. After the humiliation, the insults, the cruelty. The old man lifted a trembling hand, placing it gently on his son's arm. I've endured worse, he said softly, and I didn't raise you to use power for revenge. The store was silent. Not even the refrigerators hummed now. The son's chest rose and fell heavily, his jaw tight, his fists clenched. His father's words pierced deeper than any insult ever could. Let them stay, he continued. Let them learn. Their shame today is punishment enough. Fire them, and they'll walk away angry, thinking they were wronged. But let them stay, and every time they step into this store, they'll remember the day they mocked a man who could have destroyed them, but didn't. The son's fury quivered, fragile under the weight of his father's wisdom. Slowly, he exhaled, his fists loosening, his eyes softened, though the storm inside him had not yet fully calmed. He turned back to the staff, his voice still sharp, but steadier now. You heard him. He's sparing you. Not me. Him. The clerks nodded quickly, words tumbling from their mouths. I'm sorry. We didn't mean it. We'll never do it again. The old man's eyes met theirs, and he gave a small, weary nod. I accept your apology, but remember this. Be careful how you treat people. You never know who you are crossing. Next time, you may not be so fortunate.
The store remained frozen in silence long after the old man spoke. His words had settled over the room like a blanket, heavy, undeniable. The staff, once full of arrogance and mockery, now stood bowed, their faces pale, their pride shattered. The customers shifted uncomfortably, some ashamed for having stayed silent, others quietly awed at what they had just witnessed. The son looked at his father, his chest still heaving, his eyes still burning. In his mind he replayed every insult, every cruel laugh, every moment of humiliation his father had just endured. The urge to cast down judgment, to swing the hammer of authority, still lingered like fire in his veins. But then he saw his father's face, the calm, the gentleness, the quiet strength that had raised him all those years. And for the first time that evening, the storm inside him began to ease. The old man turned slowly, basket still in hand, his shoulders damp with milk, but his dignity intact. He walked to the counter with a steady grace, placing the bread on the register as if nothing had happened. The staff scrambled, fumbling over themselves to wipe the counter clean, to bag the groceries quickly, their apologies tumbling like desperate prayers. He paid, he thanked them, and he turned to leave. But before stepping out, he paused, his voice calm, steady, yet resonant enough to silence every breath in the room. Strength, he said, is not in how loud you can shout, or how much power you can wield. True strength is in restraint, in knowing when to forgive, even when revenge would be easier. He glanced back at his father, his eyes full of quiet wisdom. I didn't raise you to be feared. I raised you to be respected. The son lowered his head slightly, the fury finally ebbing into something softer, something heavier. Respect, mercy, legacy. The old man's gaze shifted to the staff, who stood trembling. Be careful how you treat people, he said softly.
Because every face you mock, every life you belittle, carries a story you cannot see. Next time, you may not be so fortunate. With that, he turned and walked slowly toward the door, the crowd parting silently for him. He left the store not as a victim, but as something greater, an embodiment of dignity, of mercy, of unbreakable strength. His son followed, his heart heavy, but his steps sure. He had seen power before, in wealth, in authority, in ownership. But tonight, he had witnessed something far rarer, the power of forgiveness, the kind that humbles not just the guilty, but everyone who sees it. The door closed behind them, and in the silence that followed, the store felt forever changed. Sometimes, the greatest victories don't come from revenge, but from mercy. Sometimes, the most powerful voice isn't the one that shouts, but the one that forgives. And sometimes, the people we dismiss as weak are the very ones who carry the strongest hearts. So I'll leave you with this question. If you were the victim, humiliated, mocked, degraded in front of everyone, what would you do? Would you forgive, or would you seek revenge?